What happens when a cowboy helped an Apache woman fix her wagon? Next day, war paint riders ringed his cabin. Witness this unbelievable, true-inspired story right here on Whisper of the Past. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share where you're watching from. Let's get started. The Arizona sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty trail as Jake Morrison guided his horse toward his remote cabin. It was the summer of 1873, and tensions between settlers and Apache tribes ran higher than the midday heat. Most white men avoided Apache territory altogether, but Jake had built his life on the edge of two worlds, respecting the land and those who'd lived there long before him. That afternoon changed everything. As Jake rounded a bend in the canyon, he spotted a broken wagon ahead, its wheel shattered against the rocky ground. A woman in traditional Apache dress struggled with the damage, her dark hair gleaming in the sunlight. Most cowboys would have ridden past without a second glance, fear overriding any instinct to help. But Jake wasn't most cowboys. He dismounted slowly, hands visible, speaking in the few Apache words he'd learned from trading posts. The woman, whose name was Nalte, watched him with cautious eyes that had seen too much violence to trust easily. Her wagon carried supplies for her elderly father's camp, miles away in the mountains. Without help, she'd be stranded in the open desert as night approached, vulnerable to both the elements and any hostile riders who might pass by. Jake set to work immediately. He had spare timber and tools in his saddlebag, always prepared for emergencies in this unforgiving land. For 2 hours, they worked side by side in near silence, communicating through gestures and the occasional word. Nalte proved herself skilled with her hands, holding pieces steady while Jake hammered and bound the wheel back together. It wasn't pretty, but it would hold long enough to get her home safely. As the sun began its descent, painting the canyon walls in shades of orange and crimson, Nalte prepared to leave. She reached into her wagon and pulled out a small leather pouch, pressing it into Jake's calloused palm. Inside were sacred herbs and a stone carved with symbols he didn't understand. Through broken English and sign language, she made him understand this was powerful medicine, a debt acknowledged. Jake nodded respectfully, watching as she drove the repaired wagon up the trail and disappeared into the gathering dusk. He thought little of it that night, cooking his simple supper and bedding down in his one-room cabin. He'd done what any decent person should do, nothing more. The desert wind whistled through the canyon as he drifted to sleep, unaware that his simple act of kindness had been observed by eyes hidden in the rocks above. Dawn broke cold and gray the next morning. Jake stirred his coffee over the fire, planning his day's work on the fence line. But something felt wrong. The usual morning sounds, the birds and distant coyotes, were absent. An eerie silence blanketed the canyon like fresh snow. Then he saw them. Warriors on horseback emerged from behind every rock and ridge, their faces painted for war in striking patterns of red, black, and white. They formed a perfect circle around his cabin, at least 20 riders, each armed with rifles and traditional weapons. Jake's blood ran cold. This was it. This was how it ended. He'd heard the stories, whispered in saloons and trading posts, about what happened to lone settlers caught in Apache territory during conflicts. His hand instinctively moved toward his rifle by the door, but something stopped him. Perhaps it was the memory of Nalte's grateful eyes, or perhaps it was the recognition that he was hopelessly outnumbered. Either way, he stepped outside unarmed, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. The warriors sat motionless, their painted faces impossible to read. The morning sun glinted off their weapons, and Jake could feel sweat trickling down his spine despite the cool air. Minutes stretched like hours. No one moved, no one spoke. The tension was thick enough to choke on. Then the circle parted, and through the gap rode an older warrior, his face marked with the lines of authority and wisdom. His war paint was more elaborate than the others, marking him as a leader of significant standing. He guided his horse directly to where Jake stood, stopping just feet away. Jake forced himself to meet the man's eyes, showing respect but not submission. The leader studied him for what felt like an eternity. Then, in heavily accented but clear English, he spoke words that Jake would never forget. This was Nalte's father, the chief of their band. His daughter had returned safely the previous evening and told him of the white cowboy who helped her without asking for payment or trying to harm her. In a time when most encounters between their peoples ended in bloodshed, Jake's simple act of human decency had created a crack in the wall of distrust. But the chief's visit wasn't just to say thank you. His warriors had painted themselves for war, not celebration. They'd been tracking a group of renegade miners who'd attacked an Apache camp 2 days prior, killing women and children. The trail led through this canyon, and when scouts spotted Jake's cabin, many warriors assumed he was part of the raiding party. They'd come at dawn to deliver justice. Only Nalte's urgent intervention, riding through the night to reach her father's camp, had prevented an attack. She'd convinced them to observe first, to see if this was the same man who'd helped her. When they'd watched Jake through the night and morning, seeing him alone and going about honest work, they'd believed her story. The pouch of sacred medicine she'd given him now hung around Jake's neck, visible proof of his identity. The chief made Jake an offer that morning. His cabin sat on land that both peoples claimed, but the Apache would recognize his right to stay. In return, Jake would serve as a bridge between worlds. When troubles arose, when misunderstandings threatened to explode into violence, he would help both sides see truth instead of assumption. It was a dangerous position, one that could easily get him killed by either side, but it was also a chance to prevent the kind of tragedy that had brought painted warriors to his door. Jake accepted, and the circle of warriors dispersed as suddenly as they'd appeared, vanishing into the canyons like morning mist. But they left behind something precious, a fragile peace built on one man's choice to see another person's humanity before their differences. For the next 3 years, Jake Morrison kept that promise, serving as an unlikely mediator in a land torn by conflict. His story reminds us that in times of division and fear, the simple choice to help someone in need can ripple outward in ways we never imagine. One fixed wagon wheel, one act of basic human decency, became the difference between war and peace, between death and life. That's the power hidden in everyday kindness, waiting to change the world if we're brave enough to reach across the divides that separate us. Thank you for watching Whisper of the Past.